Hi, it's Laura at Aquamarine18 Tarot and Books. Thanks for stopping by my channel today. Welcome or welcome back. I am here with a VR to a new tag. I don't get to say that very often. A new tag created by Amy over at Strength Reversed. I will link Amy's video in the description box below. The tag is called Convince Me Oracle Tag. It has 4 questions. And in introducing and creating this tag, in her video, Amy shares not really being an oracle person, but being a tarot person. And so the kind of underlying theme, I guess, of this tag, Convince Me Oracle, is why would a tarot reader also work with oracle? Why would one pick up an oracle deck when they could pick up a tarot deck? And I was immediately drawn to make a VR to this tag because I think that I kind of had to convince myself when it comes to oracle decks that they were for me. I did not pick up my first oracle deck until I had already been reading tarot for years. And when I did pick up that first deck, which was Earthbound Oracle by Skull Garden, it was then more than a year before I bought a second oracle deck. So my entry into the world of oracle was very slow paced. And looking at that retrospectively, I think that that's because I kind of had to convince myself. I didn't really know what to do with oracle or how to make it a part of my practice that felt like something I wanted. So I relate to this tag in ways that made me really keen to VR. Before I get to the questions, I just want to, put one kind of caveat on my answers, and that is that for the purpose of replying to this tag, I am only looking at, and I have a pile here, I'm only looking at what I would call, oracle decks proper, or decks that are strictly oracle and nothing else, by which I mean I am not thinking about things like Lenormand, I'm not thinking about things like playing cards that have their own established systems. And I'm also not thinking about the kind of hybrid tarot oracle decks. I don't have a lot of these in my collection, but something like The Oracle of Many Paths by James Eads, that to me is a tarot deck. It has oracle in the name, but to me it's a tarot deck. So I'm kind of putting all of that to one side and just looking at decks that I would only refer to as oracle. That's it. So without further ado, question number 1 is, what draws you to oracle decks? What qualities do you look for or avoid? I think that there are some things here that are fairly obvious, can be kind of taken for granted, that would apply to, me looking for any kind of deck, tarot, oracle, or otherwise. I have to like the art. If I think that the artwork is fucking ugly, I'm not going to buy it. I have to at least be interested in the theme, if there is a theme, insofar as there's a theme. If a deck has a theme that I have no interest in, I'm obviously not going to pick it up. That's true of tarot, oracle, and so on. But there are some things very specific to oracle that I do consider if I'm looking to add something to my collection. I feel like, for me, oracle almost has to justify its place in my collection in ways that I don't make a perspective tarot deck do. If I'm considering buying an oracle deck, I need to go through a process with myself where I look at that deck and that, maybe watch a video about it or browse, pictures, whatever that might be, and talk myself through how I would use it. For me to add an oracle deck to my collection, I have to have some sense of what I'm going to do with it. And that could be, oh wow, this is going to pair really well with this tarot deck. I've been looking for an oracle to pair with the tarot deck. Or that might be, oh wow, this would fit right into my animal gnosis or animal learning practice. This deck would be perfect for that. Or, something. I would do this kind of readings with this oracle deck. There has to be some sense of how I'm going to use it, because if I buy an oracle deck with no idea what I'm going to do with it, there is a much higher chance that the answer will be that I will do nothing with it and it will sit on my shelf. So I have to have a sense of how I'm going to use it. I look for oracle decks then that fit into my practice in some way, that are in some way relevant to what I'm already doing. When I'm looking at an oracle deck, I also look at, is there a system built into it? Does it have suits? Does it have, some sort of set approach to how its creator envisions it being used, for example? Some decks, I think, in the Oracle world have really strong uses built into them, like something like deck for wonder walking, right? That has a system of suits, that you may or may not incorporate into your engagement with it. The suits are not super vital, but the deck for wonder walking is very much designed to be used in a particular way that involves kind of going outdoors and looking for things to observe and considering those observations in different ways. Something like that. I mean, if that's a thing that I'm not interested in doing, then that wouldn't be a deck for me, for example, right? So I look at whether there's some use built into the deck, and if there is it one that appeals to me? In the wonder walking case, it absolutely is. I love that deck. But obviously, if I had no interest in that, beautiful though the artwork is, it wouldn't make it into my collection. I also, in thinking about all of this, is there a system? What would I use it for? I consider the guidebook as well for Oracle in ways that I don't necessarily with tarot. At this point, as a tarot reader, at least with decks that are Smith-Waite influenced, Marseille influenced, or Pip, and even decks that are quite abstract, I feel very comfortable. I feel experienced as a tarot reader. I feel pretty good about, with most tarot decks anyway, picking up the deck and working with it immediately. I don't tend to need a guidebook for a tarot deck. Obviously, there are exceptions. Something like the Herb Crafter's Tarot, for example, is someone who's not an herbalist or an herb expert. For a tarot deck like that, I'm absolutely going to look at the guidebook and make sure that it's got what I need. But for a lot of tarot decks, I don't need a guidebook at all at this point. Oracle, I feel like, depending on the deck, can be very book dependent for me, or, in some cases, very much not. If I'm working with, to pick on another example, an herb deck, something like Dirt Gems as an oracle that I love, that is beautiful. A huge part of my love of that deck is the guidebook. The guidebook is excellent, and I would have no use for that deck if it didn't have a good guidebook, because just the herb, there's no keywords or anything. It wouldn't really do anything for me. So I think about the guidebook and how that will play into my experience for sure. And I think about whether the deck is one that absolutely needs to be used with the book versus not. And I would say that all of those considerations are very Oracle specific for me and aren't necessarily things I think about with tarot. In terms of avoiding, things I avoid with an Oracle deck, kind of the flip side of these things, if I can't think of how I would possibly use something, if I look at an Oracle deck and think, I have no clue what I would do with that, I'm not going to get it. Because, the budget is constrained in the ways the budget is constrained, and I don't want to just be, adding things that I can't see a use for me. And that's no judgment on the deck necessarily. It could be an excellent deck for someone else, but if I can't figure out how I would use it in terms of how I am as a reader, then it's not for me. The other thing that I would say that I avoid with Oracle decks is a lot of repetition. I have come across occasionally Oracle decks, either the deck itself or sometimes the guidebook, where you end up with a lot of repetition of themes, potentially even repetition of keywords. I think it's the Supra Oracle, by Usi. I really like the Super Oracle, but the guidebook is really repetitive and assigns the same keyword to a number of different cards in the deck in ways that make the guidebook actually a thing that I just don't use. but the deck I like. If an oracle feels really repetitive, like I'm going to get a bunch of cards with the same message on it, that tends to be something that I don't gravitate towards personally. The second question in the tag is, why use oracle decks? What can they do that tarot can't? This was a question that immediately interested me the most, because I just don't think I've ever asked myself or been asked this question in precisely this way. So thank you, Amy, for this. Why use oracle decks? I mean, use them if you want to. If you see one that you really want to play around with, I think you should do that. I'm not one who's super keen on convincing people to do things. So maybe I'm a weird one to pick this tag. Like, I'm not going to convince anyone of something, I don't think. But if you want to try a thing, try a thing. A couple of reasons that I would say that I use oracle, instead of tarot. A couple of reasons that may or may not, appeal to you or resonate with you. One of the reasons that I would say to use tarot, or use oracle, instead of tarot, use oracle, is if you want to explore a particular theme, but you don't want the overlay of the tarot meanings on top of it. And so thinking about something like an animal deck, this is Animal Allies 2 by Jessica Swift. I much prefer choosing an animal card for, what animal am I going to learn from and with this month, or, at the end, maybe at the end of a tarot reading, a supporter to learn from as I go forward or something like that. I prefer a deck like this if I want to choose an animal, because it doesn't come with the underlying tarot message underneath. Now, could you do choose an animal messenger reading, one card reading for yourself, with the Anima Mundi tarot, which is a tarot that has, a different animal on each card? Sure, you could. But I do think that there's something different for me about choosing a card from a deck like this, right? Like if this was Hippo 8 of Pentacles, that for me as an experienced tarot reader would immediately import a bunch of significations from the 8 of Pentacles that for me Hippo may or may not carry, right? And that may or may not be relevant to me in that moment. So I do like the neutrality of a deck like this in terms of not having those tarot correspondences built into it. I would say this similarly with something like a tree-based oracle or an herb oracle, again, like something like Dirt Gems. I can imagine for someone, this is not so much something that I'm necessarily interested in, but I can imagine if someone wanted to maybe have an angel message or wanted to explore getting to know a particular deity or something like that, having a deck that does that doesn't wedge itself into the tarot system and is instead an oracle, which means that it can kind of just be its own thing. I can imagine that being appealing. Another way that I would say that I go to an oracle deck that isn't a way that I go to tarot is if I want an affirmation. And this is Sacred Incantations, Rituals of Trans Wisdom. This deck is something very special to me. I'm not one for affirmation decks for the most part. This deck speaks to particular kinds of lived experiences that no other deck that I've ever encountered does. I think that one could create a deck like this within the tarot system. But I also think that were I trying to create a deck like this, I would not want to be constrained by trying to fit it into the tarot system, if that makes sense. And maybe that's going a bit far afield of the prompts here, like almost into why create an oracle deck as opposed to creating a tarot deck. And for me, creating an oracle deck just leaves so much room, you know. There's no preset system. The system is what you make it, or maybe there is no, you know, structure. The cards are more individual. This does have suits. I don't really refer to them when I'm reading. This is a 1-card draw for me. Sometimes I go through this deck face up and pick the one that I feel like I just need to have on my table for a while. Sometimes I go through this deck and, you know, I shuffle and draw one. This would feel very different, again, if it had tarot layered over top of it. This card, we are strong and enduring, but we also break. If this also said card number 8, strength, on it, it would read differently to me. So, yeah, why use Oracle deck? I would say for an affirming message. And for me, that is also, I think, in part because as a tarot reader, I like a tarot deck to feel relatively maybe balanced or neutral. I don't tend towards tarot decks that feel overwhelmingly positive, like the kinds of tarot decks that rename the death card because death is scary. You know, like that's not the kind of tarot deck that I tend to draw, that I feel drawn towards. But there is a place for an affirmation deck in my life, you know, especially one that's like sacred incantations. So that's another reason to use Oracle. What can Oracle cards do that tarot can't? I don't know that there is anything. I had to really think about this one. I don't know that there is anything that an Oracle deck can do that tarot can't, other than perhaps what I've been talking about with these two examples, maybe like give a different reading experience, which I think maybe is enough, right? That's enough for me in these kinds of cases. For me, though, as someone who, again, likes playing around with different systems, likes exploring, I have found over the course of my reading life that I tend to just find certain systems or types of tools better suited for me personally for different kinds of readings, right? Could I do a yes or no reading with tarot? Yes, but I wouldn't because geomancy feels more obvious to me. So does playing cards, for that matter, for a yes or no question. That's not because tarot can't do yes, no, but it's because these other systems, as I work with them and as I've learned them, feel like more natural and obvious choices. For me, that may be different for someone else, right? For someone else, yes, no might be flip a coin, which I've also done, but it's not something I do a lot. It's not so much for me that Oracle can do things that tarot can't, as it is, you know, like these decks, Animal Allies or Sacred Incantations show, they give a particular experience for me, at least in particular kinds of readings, that tarot wouldn't replicate in precisely the same way. And so I find use value in that. The third question is, how do you use Oracle? So I made a video about how I use Oracle, and I, you know, gave kind of examples of a bunch of different types of ways that I use Oracle. I will link that video in the description box below. I'm not going to do a bunch of examples here because I would be kind of repeating myself from that video, but how I use Oracle, I will draw a single card, you know, as an affirmation or a source of support from a deck like this, or a theme to learn with or work with, like an animal of the month, an herb to explore during a particular moon cycle, things like that. That's a very kind of one card approach. I'll also sometimes use an Oracle deck to draw one card as a concept to maybe work within a meditation or something like that. I will, with some decks, do a full reading with just an Oracle deck. That for me tends to read more like a cartomancy style, like not usually with spread positions, but maybe. I will do a full reading with an Oracle deck. Not all Oracle decks to me work very well in this way. I wouldn't do that, for example, with animal allies. I wouldn't draw like 9 different animals and try to make a message out of that. But some Oracle decks do work well for me in a reading on their own. Sometimes I like to read tarot and Oracle together. Sometimes that'll be dedicated spread positions, so I'll maybe have a tarot spread, but then there'll be one spread position at the end that's something like a crystal that would be a good source of support in dealing with this issue, and then I could draw from a deck that's an Oracle deck that has crystal correspondences, for example. So I'll make a spread tailored to the decks that I have, and I'll decide ahead of time which positions are the tarot and which are the Oracle. Sometimes I'll draw 1 Oracle and 1 tarot card per spread position because I like doing multiple cards per spread position. Sometimes I'll use Oracle to inspire spread positions, draw a couple of Oracle cards, especially cards that are like a single word on the card. I have a deck that I'll show in a minute that does this really well, and I'll then use those keywords to inspire spread positions for a tarot spread and put the tarot cards underneath. I really like doing that. And then also I would say there are some like non-reading purposes that I use Oracle for. So I do have 1 or 2 astrology decks that have kind of a card for each house, a card for each sign, a card for each planet. And I'll lay out my own birth chart with that just to get a visual. Like, that's not a reading per se, but I find that useful. I will have the card from a deck like that for whatever sign the sun is in at any given time. So I have an Aries card out on my my table right now as I film this just after spring equinox, as a kind of display, right? So that's something that I use Oracle decks as well. I wouldn't buy an Oracle deck, but like personally, I wouldn't buy an Oracle deck just to use for display purposes, but it is a thing that I enjoy doing in my space. I'm not one on my reading table to have a lot of like decor necessarily, but having a couple of cards, in a little card holder is a thing that I do like to do. And astrology cards, for example, work well for that for me. Question number 4, your favorite Oracle decks. Now, y'all know I suck at favorites. It's hard for me to pick favorites. So I've just grabbed some Oracle decks that I really like, and I'm going to show them briefly with some conversation of why I like them. And I've tried in doing this to pick a variety that gives some sense of both how I work with Oracle and also maybe give some inspiration and show Oracle decks of different styles, because Oracle is so varied, right? That I think, it's a very diverse category, so it can be a lot of things, right? So one Oracle deck that I love is the Great Lakes Oracle by Colleen Foote and Sarah Palmer. This is just a beautiful, I'm covering up the words. This is a beautiful deck that is watercolor, and it features scenes and locations and figures and natural items like from the Great Lakes region. I think that if you're a person with no connection to the Great Lakes region, this may not be the deck for you, but I grew up on the shores of Lake Huron. I live still in, broadly speaking, the Great Lakes region. I'm not on a lake directly anymore, but I'm within a short drive. And so this is a very familiar kind of deck for me, and I really like working with it. It has a good book overall as well. Another deck that I love as an Oracle deck is the Oracle of Simple Space. This is by TarotTube's own Satu, whose channel is 9 Coins by Satu. And this is a really cool deck because it is space themed. It has astrological components in it. Like, it does have a card for each sign and a card for each planet. It also has a whole bunch of other space-related phenomena in it as well. And it's one that I think, you know, somebody who likes astrology could work with that kind of backing. But also one that anyone could use, whether they're an astrology person or not. Moonwalk, and the keyword is patience. Each card has a keyword. So for me, this is a space deck and not an astrology deck. I pair this with the Star Trek Tarot. But it does have these astrological components, Virgo here. But you could work with this in an oracle reading even if you really didn't know much about or have a strong affinity to the signs, for example. I think the keywords are really well chosen. And, you know, the color palette goes with a lot of things. This I can do a reading with on its own, or I love pairing it with a tarot deck like the Star Trek Tarot, or Stars of Umber Tarot is another one that goes with this. It's kind of a space theme. So that's a beautiful oracle deck, and that's a one that Satu has in the, I think it's a Make Playing Cards shop. A mass market oracle that has become one of my favorites and was my most used oracle deck last year, that I used the most times, is the Bloodlands Oracle by Amory Abbott. It's a black and white deck. It was published by who? Who published you? I want to say it's Red Feather. It has a good book, a good chunky book. And it is natural phenomena, including some man-made, or human-made rather, like this tomb, nurse log. This is a usually one card draw for me. The guidebook is really good, and something that the guidebook does that I enjoy is that for some of the cards it gives the added context, you know, beyond this is a meaning for the card. It also gives, you know, if this card shows up in a reading with this other card in the deck, that gives this kind of spin on the meaning, and I think that that's really cool. You know, as a way to getting thinking. The deck does not have keywords on it, so if you have a strong nature-based perspective and affinity there, you could read this openly with your own understandings, but it also has some keywords in the book, so you could draw one and then read the book. And I have a video all about this deck, but just to show briefly, each gets some keywords, a reversed meaning. I don't use reversals with this deck. And each one has an element associated with it as well. The Bloodlands Oracle I just think is beautiful. I think Amory Abbott's art is beautiful. With it being black and white, I think it pairs with a lot of things really well. I get a lot of use out of this deck. Another oracle deck, or family of oracle decks, that I really love are the Tree Whisper Oracle decks by Maggie Black. There are 3 of these decks. I have 2 of the 3. And these are edited photography that the creator took. The creator is also Druid. I'm a Druid, not gonna lie, that's part of the poll here. And they just have one title on each card. And these are, I wasn't quite sure if I would love this when I bought this deck, because I tend towards photography decks that are not like edited this heavily. And so I wasn't sure. But these just read so nicely. They're beautiful as spread positions. They're beautiful as meditation prompts, but also just picking one as part of a daily draw with maybe some tarot cards around it. I love this deck. And these are, I think they're out of print technically, but the creator basically does print runs of these and gauges interest ahead of time. So if you're interested in them, you can check out her website and see if there's any print runs coming up. I would like to get the 3rd one, They're all kind of similar concept, but things like the sizes and the seasonalities are a bit different between the different decks, so I won't show more cards, but I also have the Tree Whisperer Oracle Secret Garden, which is I think the second one. There is a third one that I don't have though. Those are beautiful. More favorite Oracle decks. I've got just 2 more here. No, I don't. That's a lie. I have 4. 4 more favorites. Another favorite, a longtime favorite, is the Journey Oracle by Kelly Fitzgerald of The Truth in Story. This is a hexagonal deck. And you can get this, or one could get this, I'm not sure the availability of this right now, in token form. So you can get them as these little tokens. There's one on the bag here. So you can use it as a casting system. But as a deck, it's gorgeous. These lay out in a cool kind of honeycomb, layouts, and there's different ideas in the book for readings like that. This I really love because it has a lot of types of correspondences and concepts that are important in my practice as a druid. So it has cards, for example, for the elements, cards for the moon phases, cards for the worlds. There's middle world there. Day and night. Cards for the directions that correspond well with how I think of the directions. West is ending there. Like, I think just the worldview that informs this deck, I'm not going to say is the same as mine, but is certainly, compatible, and we have some shared vocabulary. And so that makes this a really good deck for me. This can be a single card draw for me, but most of the time it isn't. There are some spreads in the book that I like for this one. And it just looks so cool when you lay out all the cards fitting together. This is a great deck. And I like the tokens as well as a casting system. But I will say, in terms of kind of out-of-the-box utility and being able to use the tool and the system more quickly, this is way more approachable than the tokens. The tokens, you're just working with symbols like these symbols in the middle of the card. Whereas with the card, you get a keyword. So you could, for example, just work with these signs, and then the keyword is discernment. Adult. The keyword is achievement, and there's a child, an adult, an elder, and so on. With the tokens, they're harder to use without doing some amount of study, because the symbol on its own, while I would say it is intuitive, it's not obvious. So the Oracle deck format in this case makes this a more readable system in a quicker way. One of my favorite recent Oracle releases, hands down, that I think is absolutely brilliant, is the Endless Oracle. The creator, Eric, has since released an Endless Tarot as well, which I also like, but honestly, the Oracle is the one that I love. It has a strong kind of fantasy and storytelling, vibe to it. So have cards like the Clashing Armies, the Ships, the Witches, the Tree. You could work with this without the book. If these are concepts, from storytelling and myth and that you feel like you would have strong meanings for on your own, but the book is really good. Eric writes a really good guidebook, and he talks about, not just meanings for the cards, but also his kind of thought process. He gives this kind of first person account of well, I was thinking about this concept and I wanted a card with this concept, and this kind of symbol really fit for that, and this is kind of the inspiration for this and why I made it this way. And that's just a nice added layer. At this point, I'm reading with this deck without the book, but the book is excellent. The book is excellent for this. It's well written, it's clear, it gives a lot for each card. I think it's a really good deck book combo. And there's a cat card. Who doesn't want a cat card? And this is a deck that is one of those decks that I would almost read as a cartomancy style. Like I could read a 9-card box reading with just this, for sure. This is also one where I might put a tarot card and an oracle card each. So if I was doing, this is not something I do a lot, but if I was doing something like a past, present, future reading, I could choose one endless tarot and one endless oracle card for past, one each for present, one each for future, and that would work really well for me. So this is a very good kind of multi-purpose, multi-card spread deck in my opinion. And I think that that kind of an oracle deck is very hard to pull off. And, you know, to Amy's point, I think in some of these questions, it takes something special, I think, for me to want to go to an oracle for that kind of cartomancy style reading instead of going to something like playing cards, right? Or going to even like something like Lenormand. I'm not a very good Lenormand reader. I haven't spent a ton of time with it, but for me to choose an oracle for that style of reading, it has to be kind of balanced and structured and conceptual in particular kinds of ways that I think that the Endless Oracle does really, really well. 2 more. My camera's already cut me off once for going on too long, so I will restrain myself. I love The Uncertain Oracle by Cedar McLeod. This is a round, colorful deck. Those are the backs. And these are just abstract paintings with a single keyword. No book, doesn't need it. Belonging. Action. Light. Small magic. Some of the text is probably hard to read on screen, but it is readable in person. Solar. I like this because it has keywords that you don't always see a lot in an oracle, like small magic, you know, rest. I also like this because it is not warm and fuzzy. It has some challenging concepts in here, and it also has some that are maybe ambivalent, could be feeling affirming or not, but you know, it does have words like discomfort, variable, fractured. You know, it's not all positive. Canyon. I have used this for making tarot spread positions. I have used this on its own to do a reading, and I have done a single card draw with this. This is not a single card draw deck for me, but it could be that. Love that. Last but not least, one of the first oracle decks that I got after my year with nothing but Earthbound Oracle. One of the early ones I got that I was really drawn to, and I think I saw this on Little Red Tarot first, I'm not sure. This is the Life Path cards. This is by Kristen of Over the Moon Academy, who does all kinds of cool decks that are print on demand. And Life Path cards is a deck comprised of pictures of paths. Some of them have, you know, kind of the backs of people in them or vehicles and things like that. There are human-made landscapes here, or like landscape features for sure. But the focus is on the paths. And there's a whole Life Path cards, you know, set of modules that Kristen has made about, has made about how to work with this and how to interpret different components of the paths. And these are really cool for meditation purposes. These are really cool for looking at face up and kind of doing some kind of spell work with. Also, you can come up with all kinds of different, you know, what path am I on right now? What path would I prefer to be on right now? You know, you come up with lots of different readings to do with these. I think that they're just beautiful photos. And something really smart that the creator did was on the back, they're numbered. You can see the number there at the bottom. So if you're journaling or something like that, there is a ready way to write down which one you got, right? So, you know, if you wanted to journal about this card, you would know that it was card number 10 because there's a 10 on the back without putting anything intrusive on the front of the card. So the card can just be the image and nothing else. And I think that that's a really good creative choice that I like. So those are some favorite Oracle decks. I could show many more, but I'm going to restrain myself and not get cut off by the camera again. So I don't know if I've been convincing about Oracle decks and why I think they're great, but I would love to hear from more folks. Why would you pick up Oracle? Why as a tarot reader? Do you also work with Oracle? Why would you suggest giving Oracle a try? I think that it's a really good set of questions. Thank you so much to Amy at Strength Reversed for creating this tag. Thank you for watching, and I wish you a great day. See you again soon.